What you see before you is Thor, the third installment in our MCU Retrospective breakdown. When I mean retrospective, we are not going to be watching these films right before recording. We're going to be going based off our memory, based off the information that we've acquired, based off our knowledge of the series, and based off the history of what's been going on with these films. And since I've got these hard copies from launch, like when they were first, this is the first wave of the DVDs. This case here still has the Paramount logo. On the back, we see Paramount and Marvel. It was their big combination team up here. They teamed up to make these movies. They did the first two Iron Mans, and now they're doing Thor. This is the start of the whole MCU thing. Now, since Iron Man 2 was like the direct sequel to Iron Man 1, we haven't really seen so much as an MCU, so to speak, now. Nick Fury, Black Widow. They were all in the second Iron Man movie, so you get the start to see all these other new characters, but we don't have that shared across other films yet until this one here. Coulson shows up in this film as an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, S.H.I.E.L.D. was also the thing that showed up in Iron Man 2. Now, Nick Fury didn't come into this one yet, but Coulson will be showing up fairly, not too constantly, but he will show up again in the Avengers movie, and then he's one of the titular characters in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. series, which I have not seen. If it's a TV series, I have not seen it. I have not seen Daredevil, I've not seen Punisher, I've not seen Iron Fist. I've not seen any of the TV series, because they're TV series, and they're often shown on streaming services, and I just don't watch this. I don't care. Am I going to watch them in the future? Maybe, if they have a hard copy release or something. I don't care for streaming, to be honest with you. I know I'm a dying breed. I am a dying breed, and my generation's probably going to be the last one that cares about hard copies. Now, this film was directed by the one, the only Kenneth Branagh. Kenneth Branagh is a mixture of an excellent filmmaker, an excellent actor, and an excellent person all around that has created some of the greatest stuff. He was Professor Lockhart in Harry Potter 2, the Chamber of Secrets film. If you've never heard of Kenneth Branagh, you've probably seen that movie, so there, now you know what he looks like, now you know who he is. And I will tell you some of the films that he has directed within the past decade or so. Now, he has both acted and directed the two Agatha Christie-inspired films, Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile. I have Murder on the Orient Express, and I honestly really liked it. I think he was excellent as Mr. Poirot. No, I have not seen Death on the Nile. Do I plan to? I do. I just haven't gotten around to see it yet. He also directed Artemis Fowl. Artemis Fowl is quite possibly the stinkiest film in his entire catalog of films that he's done. And he's done this one, he's done Cinderella, he's done Sleuth, the Magic Flute, As You Like, Listening, Love's Labour's Lost, Hamlet, A Midwinter's Tale, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Swan Song, Dead Again, and Henry V. But Artemis Fowl remains the worst one that he has ever done. The worst one. Now, do I blame him for that movie? No. Just like you don't blame David Fincher for Alien 3. Sometimes you get a studio movie where the director is just there to stand behind the camera and look to somebody else who gives him directions to give to the... I have a whole rant set aside for Artemis Fowl. I am a big fan of those books, and seeing that film... Now, is this one as aggravating as Artemis Fowl? Absolutely not. In fact, I found myself liking it really good, really well. This came out quite a few years before Artemis Fowl did. And Artemis Fowl, there were so many things I got wrong there. There were so many things I got wrong there. Now, the changes that the MCU makes from the comics, okay. I am on the opposite side of the fence this time. You see, with Artemis Fowl, I read all the books before I watched the film and got pissed off by the film. In contrast, I have never read a single Marvel or DC comic. Not a single one. Not one. So when I watch the films, I only judge them based on the films and how good of a film they are, and that's how I will continue to judge these films going into the future. Whereas if they've changed the character's race, if they've changed the character's gender, if they changed anything like that, changed the culture, changed the origin, changed any of that, I wouldn't necessarily know too strongly what their original counterpart was like because I've never read any of the comics. So I can offer us just a simple audience perspective, the simple casual of the MCU superhero genre. I've only watched the TV shows, the animated TV shows during the 2000s and late 90s. I have watched all of the films, with the exception of the New Mutants and Morbius, but for the most part, I could just give you a film perspective on these. Now, getting off of Artemis Fowl for a second, Kenneth Branagh behind the screen for Thor is fine. The only thing I would argue that he does a little bit too much of, that almost anybody who has ever reviewed this film will tell you, the Dutch angles. I am not a filmmaker, I am not a cartographer, I am not a filmographer, I'm not somebody who does all the camera work or the cinematography work. I just identify these things over repeated exposure over time. What's that mean? It means if I've seen something plenty of times and eventually I pick up a term for it, I can recognize it when I see it in the future. Trial and error, repeated exposure. I was repeatedly exposed to Dutch angles in many of the films that I've watched, and once I finally learned the term for it, I could spot it easily. And in this one, I see it too many times. Now, the first time I watched it, I didn't know what Dutch angles were. The first time I watched it back in when this DVD first came out and it was first released, usually the year it was made is on the case itself. Alright, Paramount 2011. 11 years ago, almost 13 years ago. Now, back then I didn't know what a Dutch angle was. So, when I first watched it, I didn't get too pissed off about the Dutch angles because I just didn't know what it was. But even then, sometimes watching these scenes can feel a little disorienting. Is that the word? Disorienting, disbalancing, or dizzying. That's a good term. There's a lot of words in there, a lot of synonymous words, but either way, it's disorienting at times when you're watching them from all these angles, and you're like wishing that the camera would turn and change the angle to a different angle, to a better angle, or just not be tilted. And it's just sometimes you just wish the camera angle looked a little bit better when you're watching this film. But otherwise, for the most part, all of the actors in here, Anthony Hopkins is excellent. I think he's the greatest Odin that I've ever seen on screen. Not that I've seen too many Odins. And the breakout character for this scene is not Chris Hemsworth as Thor, but it was Loki, played by yeah, I'm not good at names. As you can tell, I'm not. Tom Hiddleston! Tom Hiddleston, there you go. Yeah, Tom Hiddleston. I knew his name, I just couldn't recall it at the time. You know, that's just how it is. You know an actor's name, it's like you know their name, you've said their name plenty of times, and you just can't say it! That's how it was, Tom Hiddleston. Tom Hiddleston was the breakout character in this film, and he was the breakout character in the sequel, which made the sequel highly more watchable. It was because of Tom Hiddleston being there. Tom Hiddleston as Loki was excellent. He demanded the screen with the level of sass or camp or just there was something that he offered that was very demanding to pay attention to whenever he spoke. That's the same thing with Anthony Hopkins. Whenever these two characters were on screen, you were paying attention. It was the strongest scenes in the movie. They had the strongest lines, the strongest dialogue. They made this movie. Now, Thor, played by Chris Hemsworth, this was Chris Hemsworth's, basically his, what's the word I'm looking for? This was like his chance to demand you, to tell you that he's someone worth paying attention to, that he is a character, an actor worth paying attention to. And this film was his chance to tell you that, to like get you to look at him, to pay attention to him, to look at his mannerisms, to pay attention to how he spoke, how he looked, how he acted, so that you would recognize him in the future. And I would say that he did a good job here in regards to like being somebody that you would pay attention to being an actor that you would look for in future films and would give that film a shot just because he was someone that was in it. And I'd say that Chris Hemsworth definitely pulled that off really well. Idris Elba was also another really excellent character. Natalie Portman, she was fine in this. She was fine. So many other characters in here were fine. But for the most part, all I could say is that the film was fine. It wasn't excellent. It didn't blow me out of the water. The CG was fine. It aged fine. I'm probably a minority who says that CG doesn't really bother him all that much. I mean, one of my favorite campy bad movies is Gods of Egypt. And the CG is basically a full CG movie. But I don't care. I found it entertaining, alright? So I'm one of those minorities that doesn't care about CG, alright? So take that how you will, but it didn't bother me in this movie, and it doesn't bother me in most films. The story was kind of basic, really, really basic. Thor starts the film out as an overbearing, pompous, elitist brat, entitled brat, who fights with his father on disagreements on how a kingdom should be ruled, and Odin banishes him down to Earth, but he doesn't technically banish him, but he gives him a learning experience on Earth to humble him. And Thor eventually becomes humbled over the course of an hour, and then by the time that Loki has betrayed his father and tried to take over Asgard, and Thor realizes what's going on and becomes selfless with the humans and says, if you would spare the people around me, you may take my life instead. So Loki says, okay. And then Odin gives him back his powers, he's worthy again, and the two have another brother's sibling spat. Sibling spat. Yeah, that's it. And, for the most part, it's fun. I didn't care about the chemistry between these two characters. I didn't think it existed at all. Now, did I like it, though? Like, was it better than, say, Anakin and Padme? Yeah. I guess I could find it believable. It's just kind of like a girl meets boy story, not a boy meets girl story. It's like, I could buy Natalie having a certain type of an affinity, of an infatuation, or an interest, rather, in Thor, more than I could see anything that Thor had an interest-wise in Natalie Portman's character. Jane. I could buy it in a different way. Like, she had fascination scientifically in Thor, and Thor had fascination in basically just human life, fish out of water story. And I think they did this really good. Now, what could this film have needed just a little bit more of? Well, in the future, with Thor 3 and Thor 4, that were directed by Taika Waititi, Taika filled them with way too many jokes, but there was a certain thing, at least the third one, Ragnarok, had, that kind of balanced the serious tone with the comedic tones, and I think that this film needed just a little bit more comedic tone. Now, Natalie Portman's co-worker that she works with is Jane in this film. She offers plenty of comedic tones. There's also Skarsgård in there. He's awesome. There's a lot of great people in here, but there's just not a lot to demand your attention unless you've, watched it plenty of times like I have. If I had only watched this film once, 11 years ago, and I was trying to come back to tell you about it, I probably wouldn't be able to remember as much as I did. It's simply because I've watched this film so many times that I can remember so much about it. That is to say that it's not a bad movie, it's just not something that leaves such an extremely strong impression on me, the viewer. I don't know if it's the same for you, though I would say that, like Iron Man, Chris Hemsworth really does make a strong impression as the hero. And I would argue that this film is the first one in the series and will remain that strongest example of a film doing a really good job at making a villain. Loki is fantastic as a villain. You see his motivations. You actually care about his motivations. His motivations are believable. His goals are believable. What he wants to do, his jealousies, his hatreds, all of it is laid on there. Tom Hiddleston does an excellent job here, and he sells it really well. He is so much better than the villains of the previous films. He's better than Obadiah. He's better than Whiplash. He's better than Hammer. He's so good in this film. He was so good that they brought him back for Avengers, man. And I think that if they're gonna make a Thor 5 or any future film with Thor, that his character will be weakened for the loss of the character of Loki. I think that Loki was that perfect foil to the Thor character, and that the two of them always need to share a film together. They do. In some way, shape, or form, Loki needed to have remained in Thor's life. And killing him off, I would have I disagreed at keeping that permanent. Now, the TV show Loki that happens, I haven't seen it. But it's a different timelines Loki, and I don't know if he's going to show up in the main timeline. We don't know. Maybe he's going to in a TV show. Oh, gosh. You could get me ranting about the TV shows, but I don't want to make this a 30-minute rant about TV shows, and now they're going to... Yeah, but that's Thor 1. It's good. I would say that the first Iron Man is better. I would say that this one might be a little bit better than the second Iron Man, but for the most part, it's a solid entry. It's a good introduction film to the character, to the villains, to the expanded Odinverse and all that stuff. It's good. It's a solid film. The next one we're going to do with this retrospective is going to be Captain America. Be imaginative, everybody.